7 words, sharp as glass, shattered the routine calm of boarding. "This seat's not for you." Spoken by a flight attendant to a black teenager, it was an insult fueled by prejudice. But what she didn't know was that this wasn't just any teen, and this wasn't just any flight. In minutes, her venomous remark would boomerang, bringing an Ashtor Boeing 737 to a standstill, triggering a high-stakes investigation and unleashing a wave of hard karma that would see her career nosedive. This is the electrifying story of how quiet strength grounded a flight and exposed a truth many tried to hide. The fluorescent lights of Dallas, Fort Worth international airports terminal dead hummed a familiar symphony of travel announcements, rolling suitcases, and the low murmur of 1,000 conversations. 17-year-old Jamal Washington clutched his backpack strap, a nervous energy thrumming beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't your average teenager. While most kids his age were probably agonizing over summer assignments or TikTok trends, Jamal was on his way to an exclusive astrophysics summer program at Caltech, a dream he'd meticulously worked towards since he was 12. He was a quiet kid, observant with a mind that soaked up information like a sponge. Dressed in a simple NASA hoodie, jeans, and well-worn sneakers, he blended into the crowd, just another hopeful traveler. His boarding pass, clutched tightly in his hand, read Seat 3A Priority Boarding. His dad, a software engineer who'd saved up airline miles for years, had insisted on getting him a better seat for the long flight to Los Angeles, a small luxury to celebrate his achievement. "A little extra legroom for my future rocket scientist," he'd joked. Jamal had navigated the TSA security check with polite efficiency, his old backpack earning a slightly longer than usual swab for explosives, a minor annoyance he'd learned to expect when traveling alone while black. He'd sighed inwardly, but offered no complaint, just a patient, "Is everything okay, officer?" before being waved through. Now standing in the bustling gate area for Ascend Air Flight 472 to LAX, he watched as families corralled their excited children and business travelers impatiently tapped on their laptops. The gate agent announced pre-boarding for military personnel families with young children and those needing extra assistance. Then the call for Zone 1, which included first class and premium economy. Jamal's zone, due to his priority status, linked to Seat 3A. He approached the podium, offered his boarding pass and ID to the gate agent, a cheerful woman named Maria, who smiled warmly. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Washington. Seat 3A, just to your left as you enter." "Thank you," Jamal replied, a small smile gracing his lips as he walked down the jet bridge. The anticipation of the program, the thrill of flying it, was all bubbling up. He loved the mechanics of flight, the sheer power of the engines, the physics that lifted tons of metal into the sky. Stepping onto the aircraft, a newer Boeing 737-800, he was greeted by a flight attendant stationed at the doorway. This woman, however, offered no smile. She had sharp features, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to scan him with an unnerving intensity. Her name tag read, Brenda. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice flat, almost clipped. "Good morning," Jamal responded politely, moving past her into the cabin. He located row 3 easily. It was the first row of the premium economy section, just behind the thin curtain separating it from first class. Seats 3B and 3C were already occupied by a middle-aged couple who offered him a brief, disinterested glance. Seat 3A was the window seat, his seat. He moved to place his backpack containing his laptop research papers and a treasured hardback copy of Carl Sagan's Cosmos into the overhead bin. It was then that Brenda appeared at his elbow, her presence sudden and imposing. "Can I help you?" she asked, but her tone wasn't helpful. It was accusatory. "Just putting my bag up," Jamal said, a little surprised. "I'm in 3A. Brenda's eyes flicked from him to the seat, then back to him, a small, almost imperceptible sneer playing on her lips. "Are you sure you're in the right section, son?" Jamal frowned slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 3A. He held up his boarding pass, clearly displaying the seat assignment. Brenda barely glanced at it. Her voice dropped, conspiratorial, yet loud enough for the couple in 3B and 3C to hear. "Look, this section is for our premium guests. Maybe you got turned around. Economy is further back." Jamal felt a flush creep up his neck. He recognized the insinuation instantly, the casual dismissal. He'd faced microaggressions before teachers who were surprised by his high-grade store clerks who followed him too closely. But this was blatant. "My boarding pass says 3A, he reiterated, keeping his voice steady, though a knot of frustration was tightening in his stomach. "Priority boarding." The woman in 3B, who had been observing with mild interest, now looked distinctly uncomfortable and turned to stare pointedly out of the non-existent window of her aisle seat. Her husband in 3C huffed and rustled his newspaper. Brenda crossed her arms, blocking his access to the overhead bin. "Sometimes there are mistakes with the boarding passes. Economy is that way," she insisted, gesturing dismissively towards the rear of the plane. "I'm sure you'll be more comfortable there." The implication was clear. You don't belong here. The words, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. Jamal felt a surge of anger, but also a familiar weariness. He was a kid, but he wasn't stupid. He knew what this was. "Ma'am," Jamal said, his voice firm but polite. "This is my assigned seat. I paid for this seat. Could you please let me put my bag up?" Brenda's eyes narrowed. "There's no need to get agitated," she said, her voice taking on a saccharine, condescending tone. "I'm just trying to help you find your actual seat." She then leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that was anything but discreet. "Listen, kid, I don't know how you got this boarding pass, but this seat's not for you. Now move along before you cause a scene and hold up the whole flight." The couple in 3B and 3C were now openly staring, their expressions a mixture of shock and discomfort. Further back heads were starting to turn as the boarding process stalled behind Jamal. The quiet hum of the cabin was being replaced by an uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by Brenda's hostile stance. Jamal took a deep breath. He wasn't going to be bullied or shamed out of a seat he was entitled to. He thought of his dad working extra shifts to afford this small comfort for him. He thought of the years of dedication it took to get into the Caltech program. He wasn't just fighting for a seat, he was fighting for his dignity. And in that moment, Jamal Washington, the quiet, observant teenager, made a decision. He wasn't going to raise his voice. He wasn't going to cause a scene in the way Brenda clearly expected. Instead, he looked her directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "No," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an unexpected weight of authority. "This is my seat, and I am not moving. Perhaps," he added, his eyes flicking pointedly to her name tag, "Brenda, you should be the one to step aside." The gauntlet was thrown. Brenda's face, already set in lines of stern disapproval, tightened further at Jamal's calm but firm rebuttal. Her eyes, the color of faded denim, flashed with a mixture of surprise and indignation. She clearly hadn't expected such direct, articulate resistance from someone she had so quickly and decisively stereotyped. Now you listen to me, young man." She hissed, her voice low and menacing, dropping the faux concern. "You're holding up the boarding process. I'm the flight attendant on this aircraft, and I'm telling you that you are in the wrong section. Either you move to the economy cabin willingly, or I will have you removed from this flight for non-compliance." The threat hung in the air, heavy and ugly. The couple in 3B and 3C exchanged nervous glances. Mr. Henderson in 3C, a portly man with a neatly trimmed moustache, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, flight attendant," he began, his voice hesitant, "but the young man showed you his boarding pass. It says 3A. Perhaps there's just a misunderstanding." Brenda shot him a withering glare that could curdle milk. "Sir, I am handling this situation. Please refrain from interfering." She turned back to Jamal, her lips curled into a sneer. "Last chance, kid. Economy. Now." Jamal stood his ground. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, oppressive silence of the front cabin. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on him, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and perhaps in some judgment. But he also felt a steely resolve solidify within him. He wasn't just a passenger. He was a ticketed customer with rights. More importantly, he was a human being, deserving of respect. "I am in my assigned seat," Jamal stated again, his voice remarkably even. "I will not be moving to economy because you don't think I belong here. If you believe there's an error with my ticket, I suggest you call the gate agent or a supervisor to verify it. But I will not be intimidated into forfeiting a seat I paid for based on your assumptions." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture wildly. He simply stood there, a picture of calm defiance, his backpack still clutched in his hand. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. This was not going according to her script. In her years with Ascend Air, she'd perfected the art of subtly and sometimes not so subtly managing passengers she deemed problematic or out of place. Usually a sharp word, a condescending tone was enough. This was different. "Non-compliance," she spat, reaching for the interphone handset near the galley. "You're choosing non-compliance." Her fingers fumbled slightly as she punched in the code to call the cockpit or the gate. Jamal watched her, his mind racing. He knew this was escalating, but he also knew he was in the right. He thought about his parents' advice. "Always stand up for yourself, Jamal, but do it with intelligence and dignity. Let your actions and the truth speak louder than any prejudice." As Brenda began to whisper furiously into the handset, her back partially turned to Jamal. He noticed something. Her name tag, Brenda, was slightly askew, but below it, almost hidden by the collar of her uniform jacket, was another smaller pin. It was a small silver pin he vaguely recognized, an airline union pin, perhaps, or maybe a years of service award. But something about it pricked his memory. Before he could dwell on it, Brenda slammed the handset back into its cradle. "The captain has been informed of your disruptive behavior," she announced, her voice filled with vindictive triumph. "He's calling ground security. You'll be removed from this aircraft, and believe me, you won't be flying Ascend Air again anytime soon." A ripple of murmurs went through the observing passengers. Removal from a flight was serious. Some looked at Jamal with pity, others with a hint of fear, perhaps assuming he must have done something truly egregious to warrant such a response. Jamal felt a moment of genuine fear then. Being escorted off a plane by security, the humiliation, the potential of missing his Caltech program, it was a terrifying prospect. But then a flicker of an idea, a desperate, long-shot gamble, sparked in his mind. It was related to that pin, to a half-remembered article his dad had shared with him about airline safety and employee accountability. He made a quick decision. He couldn't let this escalate to security without trying one last thing. He wouldn't argue with Brenda anymore. He needed to speak to someone with actual authority, someone who wasn't blinded by whatever prejudice fueled Brenda's actions. Ignoring Brenda's smug expression, Jamal calmly took out his phone. "What do you think you're doing?" Brenda snapped, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "You're not allowed to make calls while the aircraft door is open, and we're technically still boarding." Though in reality, boarding had ground to a complete halt because of her. Jamal didn't look at her. His fingers moved quickly over the screen. He wasn't calling his parents, as she might have suspected. He wasn't calling a lawyer. He was looking up a specific number he'd once, out of sheer curiosity and his love for all things aviation-related, saved in his contacts. It was a public reporting hotline, but one not many people knew about. "I'm not making a call in the traditional sense," Jamal said, his voice still quiet but firm. He found what he was looking for, a direct text line. "I am, however, exercising my right as a passenger to report a significant service and potential safety issue directly." Brenda scoffed. "Report to whom, your mommy?" Jamal ignored her. He typed a concise message. "Ascend Air Flight 472, DFW to LAX, Gate D22. Flight Attendant Brenda कर्मचारी ID. अज्ञात संभावित रूप से वरिष्ठता पिन के साथ discriminating against ticketed premium passenger in seat 3A based on race. Refusing access to seat threatening removal. Request immediate GSC Ground Security Coordinator or CRO complaint. Resolution official intervention as per 14 CFR Part 382. Situation escalating boarding, stalled." He included the flight number, gate, his seat, a description of Brenda mentioning the PIN as a potential identifier if her ID wasn't visible, the nature of the complaint, and crucially he referenced 14 CFR Part 382. This was the section of the Code of Federal Regulations that covered non-discrimination on the basis of disability in air travel. But it also set precedents and outlined procedures for handling discrimination complaints, generally often requiring the presence of a specifically trained CRO for such issues. He knew that airlines were particularly sensitive to any hint of official regulatory complaints, especially those citing specific federal codes. He hit send. The message went to a dedicated FAA oversight line that, while not always instantly responsive for minor grievances, triaged serious complaints, especially those involving active flights and allegations of discrimination or safety protocol breaches. Sometimes, if the algorithm or human screener flagged certain keywords, like specific CFR codes or allegations of discrimination on an active flight, it could trigger a faster, more direct alert to airline operational headquarters or even local FAA liaisons. Brenda watched him, a smirk playing on her lips, clearly believing he was bluffing or engaging in some childish, futile gesture. "You're wasting your time, kid. Security will be here any second." Jamal said nothing. He simply stood there, phone in hand, waiting. He knew it was a long shot. He knew that such text lines were often overwhelmed, but it was the only card he had left to play short of being physically dragged off the plane. Less than 2 minutes passed, though it felt like an eternity. The silence in the cabin was thick with tension. Passengers were whispering, some looking impatient, others clearly disturbed by the confrontation they'd witnessed. Brenda kept glancing towards the jet bridge, a predatory anticipation in her eyes, waiting for security to appear. Then a different kind of commotion started, not from the jet bridge but from the cockpit. The door, which had been closed, opened, and the first officer leaned out, a perplexed and concerned look on his face. He wasn't looking at Jamal. He was looking directly at Brenda. "Brenda," the first officer said, his voice tight. "What in the Sam Hill is going on out here?" "We just got a priority message from Operations Command Center. They're asking about a passenger discrimination complaint and a potential regulatory breach on this flight. They mentioned 14, CFR, Part 382. What did you do?" Brenda's smug expression evaporated. Her face went pale, the color draining from it, as if a tap had been opened. She stared at the first officer. Then her gaze darted to Jamal. No longer with contempt, but with a dawning, horrified realization. The kid she'd tried to bully hadn't just called his mommy. He'd done something far, far more effective. He'd in essence bypassed the immediate chain of command and flagged the incident directly to a level that could bring serious immediate scrutiny down on the airline itself. And just like that, the power dynamic on Ascend Air Flight 472 shifted irrevocably. Jamal hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't caused a physical disturbance, but with a few calm words and one well-placed text message, he had in effect put the brakes on the entire departure. The flight wasn't just stalled anymore. It was, for all intents and purposes, grounded until this was sorted out, at a level far above a single flight attendant's prejudiced whim. The first officer, a man named David Miller, with a neatly trimmed beard and tired eyes that suggested many long hauls, stepped fully out of the cockpit. The captain remained inside, likely communicating with airline operations. Miller's gaze swept over Jamal, then to Brenda, then to the uncomfortable faces of the passengers in the first few rows. "Brenda, report to the forward galley now." Miller commanded his voice, leaving no room for argument. His earlier perplexity was now hardening into a stern, official demeanor. He then addressed the passengers in a calm, authoritative tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the delay. We seem to have a procedural issue we need to address. Please remain seated. We'll get this sorted out as quickly as possible." Brenda, looking shaken and suddenly small, scurried towards the galley without a word, her earlier arrogance completely deflated. Miller then approached Jamal. "Young man," he said, his voice significantly more respectful than Brenda's had been. "I'm First Officer Miller. Can you please tell me exactly what happened here?" Jamal still standing by his seat. 3A took a breath. He calmly and concisely recounted the entire exchange, from Brenda's initial challenge about his seat to her dismissive attitude, her refusal to look at his boarding pass properly, and her ultimate threat to have him removed. He didn't embellish or sound overly emotional. He simply stated the facts. He also mentioned, she said, and I quote, "This seat's not for you. She made it very clear she didn't think I belonged in this section." Mr. Henderson from seat 3C, emboldened by the first officer's presence, chimed in. "It's true, officer. She was incredibly rude to the boy. He showed her his pass, clear as day. She wouldn't even look at it properly. Kept telling him to go to the back of the plane." His wife nodded in vigorous agreement. Miller listened intently, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. He glanced at Jamal's boarding pass, which Jamal still held. "May I?" he asked. Jamal handed it over. Miller examined it, then looked at the seat. 3A, priority. Seems perfectly in order." He handed it back to Jamal with a slight nod. "The text message you sent," Miller said, his eyes searching Jamal's. "You cited a specific federal regulation, 14 CFR Part 382. How did you know that—" Jamal hesitated for a moment. I'm interested in aviation, sir, and I've read about passenger rights. My father always told me it's important to know your rights and to stand up for yourself respectfully. He didn't feel the need to explain his detailed knowledge of FAA regulations, born from his deep passion for aerospace and countless hours spent reading everything from NTAB reports to pilot forums. Miller raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise and perhaps admiration in his eyes. Well, you certainly seem to know them. He turned towards the jet bridge, where Maria, the gate agent, was now peering in with a worried expression, alerted by the lack of movement and likely the call from the cockpit. "Maria," Miller called out, "can you come in here for a moment? And could you please contact the CRO for Ascend Air at DFW? Have them come to gate D22 immediately. We have a passenger complaint that needs their direct attention. And notify operations that Flight 472 is officially on a ground hold. No pushback until this is resolved." Maria's eyes widened, but she nodded quickly. "Right away, First Officer." The words ground hold and CRO signaled a serious situation. The next 20 minutes were a blur of controlled activity. Brenda remained in the forward galley, occasionally being spoken to by Miller in hushed, stern tones. Jamal was politely asked to wait by his seat. He finally managed to stow his backpack in the overhead bin above 3A. The couple in 3B and 3C offered him sympathetic smiles and a whispered "good for you, sticking up for yourself." Other passengers were growing restless, their murmurs increasing in volume. Announcements were made about an unexpected operational delay, but the sight of airline officials, including a stern-looking woman in a sharp business suit who introduced herself to the First Officer as Ms. Albright, the on-call Ascend Air CRO complaint. Resolution. Official entering the aircraft made it clear this was no ordinary delay. Ms. Albright was the epitome of corporate efficiency and damage control. Her expression was serious, her questions precise. She first spoke with First Officer Miller, then with Brenda, whose voice, when it occasionally carried from the galley, was now defensive and shaky. Finally, Ms. Albright approached Jamal. "Mr. Washington," she began, her voice neutral but firm. "I am Diane Albright, the complaint resolution official for Ascend Air. I've been briefed on the situation by First Officer Miller and by Flight Attendant Carmichael." So Brenda's last name was Carmichael. "I need to hear your account directly." Jamal once again recounted the events, his voice steady and clear. He emphasized Brenda's tone, her dismissiveness, and the specific phrases she used. He made sure to mention that he had clearly displayed his valid boarding pass multiple times. Ms. Albright listened without interruption, her gaze unwavering. She made a few notes in a small leather-bound notebook. When Jamal finished, she said, "Mr. Washington, on behalf of Ascend Air, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for the way you were treated by Flight Attendant Carmichael. Her actions as you've described them, and as they've been partially corroborated, are not reflective of Ascend Air's standards or policies regarding customer service and non-discrimination." Jamal nodded, appreciating the apology, but waiting to see what would happen next. An apology was one thing, accountability was another. "Flight Attendant Carmichael," Ms. Albright continued, her voice dropping slightly, "has a different recollection of some of the nuances of the conversation. She claims she was concerned about a possible ticketing error and was trying to assist you, perhaps inelegantly." Jamal met her gaze. "Respectfully, Ms. Albright, there was no inelegance. It was clear prejudice. She didn't ask to see my ticket carefully. She told me I didn't belong. She threatened me with security when I asserted my right to my seat. That's not assistance." Ms. Albright held his gaze for a long moment. I understand, she said slowly. We also have statements from other passengers, Mr. Henderson and his wife, which largely support your account of the initial interaction. It was then that Brenda Carmichael, perhaps sensing her career was teetering on the brink, made a critical error in judgment. She emerged from the galley, her face pale, but etched with a desperate defiance. He's twisting things, Brenda exclaimed, her voice rising, no longer quiet or controlled. He was being aggressive. I felt threatened. He got right in my face, challenging my authority. I was just trying to maintain order and ensure everyone was seated correctly. These premium seats are often targets for people trying to sneak into them. The accusation of aggressiveness was so patently false that it drew gasps from the nearby passengers who had witnessed the exchange. Mr. Henderson scoffed loudly. Aggressive, madame? He was the calmest person here. You were the one being hostile. Miss Albright turned to Brenda, her expression hardening considerably. Flight Attendant Carmichael, please return to the galley. Your input at this moment is not constructive. Brenda looked around wildly, as if seeking an ally, but found only disapproving or shocked faces. Even the first officer, who had been observing silently, shook his head with a frown. Her eyes landed on Jamal, filled with a venomous resentment. You set me up, she hissed at him. Coming on here with your fancy legal codes trying to make trouble. Brenda, that's enough. Ms. Albright snapped her voice, sharp as ice. Return to the galley, or I will have you removed from this aircraft by airport security for insubordination and disrupting an official investigation. That is not a threat. It is a promise. The fight visibly drained out of Brenda. Her shoulders slumped. She shot one last hateful glare at Jamal, before turning and retreating into the galley, finally silent. Ms. Albright took a deep, steadying breath. Mr. Washington, she said, turning back to Jamal. Please accept my apologies once more, especially for that outburst. It seems clear that Flight Attendant Carmichael's conduct was unacceptable. We will be taking this matter very seriously. Ascend Air has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. Jamal nodded. Thank you, Ms. Albright. Now, Ms. Albright continued, we need to get this flight underway. You are, of course, welcome and entitled to your seat 3A. For the distress and unacceptable treatment you've endured, Ascend Air would like to offer you a full refund for this leg of your journey and a $500 travel voucher for future flights with us, along with our profound apologies. It was a standard corporate response, an attempt to smooth things over. Jamal appreciated it, but something still felt unfinished. It wasn't about the money. It was about Brenda Carmichael and the attitude she represented. Ms. Albright, Jamal said quietly, I appreciate the offer. But what happens to Flight Attendant Carmichael? Will she be on this flight? Frankly, I would not feel comfortable with her serving me or anyone else after this. This was the crux of it. A voucher was nice, but it wouldn't prevent Brenda from doing this to someone else. Ms. Albright's expression became carefully neutral. Internal personnel matters are confidential, Mr. Washington. However, I can assure you that a full review of Flight Attendant Carmichael's conduct will be undertaken and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken in accordance with our company policies and FAA regulations. As for this flight, she paused, then made a decision. No, she will not be continuing on this flight. We will arrange for a replacement crew member. It will mean a further delay, but under the circumstances, it's the necessary course of action. A wave of relief washed over Jamal. That more than any voucher felt like justice. The decision to remove Brenda from the flight crew sent another ripple through the aircraft. The ground hold was extended. The captain made an announcement about an unforeseen crew issue requiring a replacement leading to more groans from passengers, but also a palpable easing of tension in the forward cabin. As Ms. Albright coordinated with ground operations to find a standby flight attendant, First Officer Miller approached Jamal again. "You handled yourself incredibly well, young man," he said quietly, admiration in his voice. "Very few people, adult or otherwise, could have managed that situation with such composure and intelligence. That text, that was hard. You basically sent up a flare that our headquarters couldn't ignore." Jamal offered a small, tired smile. "I just didn't want to be moved from a seat I was entitled to because of how I look." "And you were absolutely right," Miller affirmed. "Enjoy your flight to LA, and good luck with your program at Caltech. Sounds impressive." "Thank you, sir," Jamal replied. It took another hour for a replacement flight attendant, a cheerful middle-aged man named Carlos, to arrive. During that time, Brenda Carmichael was quietly escorted off the aircraft by an Attendant operations manager, not in handcuffs, as she had threatened Jamal. But her face was a mask of humiliation and fury. She avoided eye contact with everyone her career at Attendant, clearly in tatters. As she passed row 3, her eyes briefly met Jamal's. There was no apology in them, only a simmering, impotent rage. Jamal simply looked back, not with triumph, but with a quiet sense of vindication. The "this seat's not for you" comment had backfired spectacularly. It hadn't just cost Brenda her position on that flight. It had triggered a chain of events that would bring far more severe consequences crashing down upon her. The hard karma was just beginning to gather momentum. The new flight attendant, Carlos, exuded a warmth and professionalism that was a stark contrast to Brenda's earlier hostility. He quickly and efficiently prepared the cabin for departure, offering genuine smiles and assistance to passengers. To Jamal he gave a discreet nod and a quiet, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington. Anything I can get for you once we're airborne, please don't hesitate to ask." The flight to Los Angeles, once it finally took off, nearly 2 hours behind schedule, was uneventful for Jamal in terms of service. He settled into seat 3A, the extra legroom genuinely comfortable, and tried to focus on Cosmos, but his mind kept replaying the morning's events. The initial shock, the indignation, Brenda's sneering face, the cool professionalism of Ms. Albright, and the surprising support from First Officer Miller. He was glad he'd stood his ground. He was relieved Brenda had been removed from the flight. Yet a small, nagging thought remained. It was about that silver pin he'd noticed beneath Brenda's name tag. It wasn't a standard airline pin. It was something different, something that tickled the edges of his memory. Upon landing at LAX and navigating his way to the arrivals curb to meet the shuttle for Caltech, Jamal finally had a moment to pull out his phone and do a quick search. He typed in "silver pin airline uniform" and scrolled through images. Nothing quite matched. He tried vintage flight attendant pins, airline association pins. Then he refined his search, trying to recall any distinctive features of the pin. It was small, perhaps a bird or wings, but with a very specific, almost antique design. He remembered seeing a similar design in an old aviation documentary his grandfather, a former Air Force mechanic, had shown him years ago. On a hunch, he searched Legacy Wings Club airline pin. Bingo. The images that popped up showed a silver pin identical to the one Brenda Carmichael had worn. It was the insignia of the Legacy Wings Club, a rather obscure and, as Jamal quickly discovered, notorious organization. It wasn't an official airline group. It was a private club, an informal and somewhat secretive society of veteran flight attendants from various airlines, ostensibly dedicated to preserving the golden age of air travel. However, digging deeper, Jamal found forum discussions and a few buried news articles that painted a far uglier picture. The Legacy Wings Club, according to these sources, was an ultra-conservative exclusionary group. Its members were often resistant to change, resentful of new hiring practices that promoted diversity and held outdated, often prejudiced views about who belonged in premium cabins, or even in the flight attendant profession itself. There were whispers of members subtly sabotaging or reporting colleagues who didn't fit their narrow mold, and of passengers of color, or those perceived as lower class, being disproportionately targeted for rigorous enforcement of airline rules, often leading to unnecessary confrontations. The pin was their discreet badge of honor, a way for like-minded individuals to recognize each other across different airlines. A cold chill ran down Jamal's spine. Brenda Carmichael wasn't just a rogue employee having a bad day. Her actions were likely part of a pattern, a manifestation of a deeply ingrained ideology shared by a shadowy group within the industry. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was potentially about a systemic issue. This discovery cast Brenda's earlier comments in an even more sinister light. These premium seats are often targets for people trying to sneak into them. It wasn't a random remark. It was a reflection of the club's elitist and discriminatory worldview. Jamal knew he had to share this information with Ms. Albright at Ascend Air. This wasn't just about his individual experience anymore. If the Legacy Wings Club was indeed a source of such attitudes, the airline needed to be aware of it. Meanwhile, back in Dallas, Brenda Carmichael's day was going from bad to catastrophic. Being pulled from a flight was humiliating enough, but the meeting with Ms. Albright and the DFW Ascend Air Station manager, Mr. Davies, was brutal. They replayed the first officer's report, the supporting statements from Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, and highlighted the extreme unprofessionalism of her outburst towards Jamal after being told to return to the galley. They noted Jamal's calm demeanor throughout, which directly contradicted her claims of feeling threatened. "Brenda," Ms. Albright said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "your actions today have caused significant disruption to our operations, have potentially exposed Ascend Air to serious legal and reputational damage, and most importantly, have violated the fundamental principles of customer respect and non-discrimination that this airline stands for." Brenda tried to defend herself again, her voice cracking. "I've been with Ascend Air for 22 years. I have an impeccable record. This is one isolated incident, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by a manipulative teenager and an overzealous first officer." Mr. Davies, the station manager, a portly man who usually had a jovial demeanor, looked grim. "Impeccable, Brenda. That's not entirely accurate. While you haven't had any formal disciplinary actions that stuck, we do have a number of soft complaints in your file over the years. Passenger feedback noting your curt demeanor, unhelpful attitude, particularly in premium cabins, nothing ever concrete enough for formal action, always just your word against theirs until today." He continued, "Today we have multiple witnesses, a formal complaint referencing federal regulations, and a first officer who felt compelled to report your conduct directly to operations. The fact that a 17-year-old passenger knew to cite 14 CFR Part 382 should tell you something about the perceived severity of your actions from his perspective." Brenda paled. She hadn't realized the extent of the soft complaints. She'd always dismissed them as overly sensitive passengers. Furthermore, Ms. Albright interjected, "There's the matter of the text message, the one Mr. Washington sent." It was flagged by an automated system at the FAA liaison office due to the keywords discrimination and the CFR code alongside an active flight number. That triggered an immediate alert to our corporate headquarters. Our CEO's office was aware of this incident before you even left the aircraft. The instruction to ensure your immediate removal from duty on that flight came directly from them. Brenda felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The CEO's office. This wasn't just a local station issue anymore. Given the severity of this incident, your clear breach of company policy, FAA regulations regarding passenger treatment, and the potential liability you've created for Ascend Air. Ms. Albright stated, her voice cold and final. Flight Attendant Brenda Carmichael, your employment with Ascend Air is suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full and final investigation. You will surrender your company ID and all Ascend Air property. You will be escorted from the premises. Suspended. 22 years of service undone in a single morning by her own prejudice and arrogance. The words hit her like a physical blow. She started to protest, to plead, but Ms. Albright held up a hand. The investigation will be thorough, Brenda. We will be looking into your service history in detail, including those soft complaints. We will also be reviewing your conduct with other crew members. If the investigation confirms what appears to be a clear case of discriminatory behavior and gross misconduct, termination of employment is the most likely outcome. Brenda was stunned into silence. Termination. Losing her job, her flight benefits, her pension. The life she had known for over 2 decades was crumbling. As she was being unceremoniously escorted out of the Ascend Air offices at DFW, stripped of her badge and her dignity, her mind reeled. How could this have happened? It was just one kid, one seat. A kid who didn't look like he belonged. She'd dealt with undesirables before subtly encouraging them to move, making them feel uncomfortable enough to comply. It had always worked. But Jamal Washington was different, and he had, through his quiet intelligence and unexpected knowledge, brought her carefully constructed world crashing down. Later that evening, Jamal settled into his dorm room at Caltech, drafted an email to Ms. Albright. He thanked her again for her intervention, and then carefully explained his discovery about the Legacy Wings Club and its potential connection to Brenda Carmichael's behavior. He included links to the articles and forum discussions he'd found. He made it clear he wasn't accusing all senior flight attendants, only highlighting a potential source of systemic bias that might warrant Ascend Air's attention for the sake of fairness and improved passenger experience for everyone. He hit send feeling he had done all he could. Now it was up to Ascend Air to see how deep this rabbit hole went. The karma for Brenda Carmichael was already in motion, but the discovery of the Legacy Wings Club had added a new, potentially explosive dimension to the fallout. Ascend Air wasn't just dealing with one problematic employee anymore. They were potentially facing a much more insidious threat from within their ranks and the industry. And Brenda, by proudly wearing that silver pin, had unwittingly provided the clue that could unravel it all. Ms. Diane Albright read Jamal Washington's email with a growing sense of unease. The Legacy Wings Club. She'd vaguely heard of it, always dismissing it as a harmless social club for older flight attendants, a relic of a bygone era. But the links and descriptions Jamal provided painted a disturbing picture, one that resonated with some of the more intractable, attitudinal problems she'd encountered over her years in airline management. She immediately forwarded Jamal's email marked urgent and confidential to Ascend Air's Vice President of In-Flight Services and the Head of Corporate Security. If there was an organized group within their workforce fostering discriminatory attitudes, it was a cancer that needed to be excised. The internal investigation into Brenda Carmichael rapidly expanded. Her personnel file was scrutinized with a new lens. Those soft complaints, dozens of them over the years, were re-examined. A pattern emerged: passengers of color, passengers dressed in non-business attire in premium cabins, and younger travelers often reported feeling singled out, treated rudely or unfairly questioned by Carmichael. Each complaint in isolation had been deniable. Collectively, they painted a damning portrait. Ascend Air's security team discreetly began looking into the Legacy Wings Club. They found that Brenda Carmichael was not just a member. She was a regional chapter organizer. They identified other Ascend Air flight attendants who were also members, some with similarly troubling, albeit less overt, patterns in their complaint histories. The silver pin, once a symbol of misplaced pride, became a marker for scrutiny. The airline also quietly reached out to other passengers from Flight 472, particularly those seated near Jamal. Several more came forward, confirming Jamal's calm demeanor and Brenda's escalating aggression. One passenger even had a short, blurry video on their phone of Brenda leaning over Jamal. Her face contorted in anger, though the audio was indistinct. It was enough to corroborate the visual dynamic of the confrontation. Brenda Carmichael, meanwhile, was in a state of shock and denial. Suspended, confined to her suburban Dallas home, she fumed. She called her union representative, but even they sounded skeptical after hearing Ascend Air's initial findings. The union could protect against unfair dismissal, but blatant discrimination, backed by multiple witnesses and a potential FAA regulatory breach, was a much harder fight. She reached out to her friends in the Legacy Wings Club, expecting sympathy and support. Instead, she found herself increasingly isolated. News of the incident, particularly the involvement of the CEO's office and the FAA, had spooked many members. They saw Brenda not as a martyr, but as a liability, someone whose recklessness had brought unwanted attention to their traditions. The club, designed to protect their idea of exclusivity, now prioritized its own survival by distancing itself from its most visible mistake. Her calls went unreturned, her emails unanswered. The silver pin now felt like a lead weight. 2 weeks later, the hammer fell. Brenda was summoned back to Ascend Air headquarters. Ms. Albright and the VP of in-flight services were present, along with a member of the airline's legal team, Mr. Carmichael. The VP began, his tone grave. "We have completed our investigation. The findings are conclusive. Your conduct on Flight 472 on June 15th constituted gross misconduct, including but not limited to discriminatory behavior towards a passenger dereliction of duty, creating a hostile environment, and insubordination. Your actions caused significant operational disruption and exposed Ascend Air to considerable reputational and legal risk." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Furthermore, information has come to light regarding your association with an external group whose values and reported activities are antithetical to Ascend Air's commitment to diversity, inclusion, and professional conduct. While membership in a private organization is your own affair, when the ethos of such a group manifests as discriminatory behavior on duty, it becomes a direct concern to this company." Brenda tried to speak, to offer excuses, but she was cut off. "The evidence against you is overwhelming and irrefutable," Ms. Albright stated. "Multiple witness testimonies, including from fellow crew, corroborate Mr. Washington's account. Your subsequent outburst during the initial investigation on board further demonstrated your unsuitability to represent Ascend Air." Therefore, the VP announced, his voice leaving no room for appeal. "Ascend Air is terminating your employment, effective immediately for cause. You will forfeit any pending flight benefits and severance. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. We advise you to collect your personal belongings from your locker by the end of the day. You will be escorted." Termination. The word echoed in the sterile conference room. 22 years. Gone. Her pension significantly impacted. Her identity as a flight attendant stripped away. The hard karma Jamal's quiet resistance had set in motion had arrived not with a bang, but with the cold, hard finality of corporate justice. Brenda stumbled out of the room, dazed. The escort was waiting. As she packed her few personal items from her locker, a spare pair of shoes, some hand lotion, a faded photo, she saw other flight attendants whispering, their eyes avoiding hers. The news had already spread. She was a pariah. But the fallout didn't end with Brenda's termination. Attendant, galvanized by Jamal's information and their own internal findings about the Legacy Wings Club, launched a broader initiative. They revised their recurrent training programs for flight crews, adding specific modules on unconscious bias, de-escalation techniques when dealing with perceived microaggressions, and the importance of cultural sensitivity. They made it clear that any affiliation with groups promoting discriminatory ideologies, if it impacted on-duty conduct, would result in disciplinary action, up to and including termination. Several other flight attendants, identified as active problematic members of the Legacy Wings Club, found themselves under increased scrutiny. Some opted for early retirement. Others quietly resigned. A few faced disciplinary hearings for past incidents that were reopened in light of the new focus. The Legacy Wings Club, within Ascend Air, at least began to wither its influence, curtailed its members realizing their traditions were no longer tolerated. The story of the Ascend Air incident, as it became known within the company, served as a stark warning. The quiet, intelligent defiance of a 17-year-old boy had exposed a pocket of bigotry and triggered a significant internal course correction. Jamal, immersed in his astrophysics program at Caltech, received a personal letter from the CEO of Ascend Air. The CEO commended his courage, and composure reiterated his apology for Brenda's behavior, and informed him that Ascend Air had taken significant steps to address the issues raised by the incident, including enhancing their training and internal oversight. He also mentioned that Jamal's refund and the travel voucher had been processed, and as a further gesture of goodwill, Ascend Air was making a donation in his name to a STEM program for underprivileged youth. Jamal read the letter with a sense of quiet satisfaction. He hadn't sought fame or reward. He had simply wanted to be treated with dignity and respect. The changes at Ascend Air. The accountability for Brenda, these were the true rewards. Brenda Carmichael's life, however, took a different trajectory. She found it nearly impossible to get another job as a flight attendant. The industry is smaller than it seems, and word of firings for cause, especially those involving passenger discrimination, travels fast. The DNI. Do not interview. Note on her record was a silent killer. She ended up working a retail job at a mall boutique, a far cry from the skies she once ruled with petty tyranny. The silver pin lay forgotten in a dusty jewelry box, a bitter reminder of her downfall. Every time she saw a young black person confidently striding through the mall, perhaps wearing a NASA hoodie or carrying a textbook, a flicker of her old resentment would surface quickly, followed by the galling memory of Jamal Washington, the boy who, with nothing but his intellect and a well-timed text message, had grounded her career and brought a harsh, undeniable karma crashing down upon her. The aviation world, in its own small way, was a little better, a little fairer, because a young man on his way to study the stars refused to let anyone tell him this seat's not for you. He had not only claimed his seat, but had also inadvertently helped to clear the air for future travelers. And so Brenda Carmichael learned a harsh lesson. Prejudice has a price, and karma often flies first class, even if you try to relegate dignity to the back of the plane. Jamal Washington didn't just get to his seat that day. He sparked a change, proving that one quiet voice, armed with truth and intelligence, can indeed move mountains, or in this case, ground a flight and redirect an entire airline's course. His actions remind us that standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, can have ripple effects far beyond what we can imagine. What did you think of Jamal's incredible composure and quick thinking? Have you ever witnessed anything like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in justice and share it to spread the message. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more incredible, true stories of David beating Goliath, where karma always delivers the final verdict. Click that notification bell so you don't miss our next story.